Evening, everybody. My name is Conor McNamara. I'm Enterprise BD for APAC. This is my co-presenter, Joanne Molesky from ThoughtWorks, and also the co-author of the Lean Enterprise book. So we're very delighted to have her here today. So first of all, thanks very much for joining us. Definitely the graveyard shift, if there was ever a graveyard shift in reInvent. So I admire your stamina and restraint in equal measure. So today's session, really, the Lean Enterprise, we've got 50 minutes. We're going to do 50 minutes of an actual presentation and then some Q&A. Really broad and deep topic. So we're going to do a really whistle-stop tour throughout a number of different, topics for discussion, and hopefully just shine a light in some areas and give you some takeaway points around maybe how you might reconsider some of the challenges you're facing in your organization as you ultimately try to deliver value for your customers. So what should you expect to learn from today's session? So give you a bit of a history around the evolution of Lean, where it's come from, where it started, how it ended up getting into this field of innovation, first in the domain of startups, and then ultimately, obviously, into the domain of the enterprise of the big corporate. Hopefully give you some takeaways around how you can challenge traditional thinking around management processes and governance practices. I think the purpose of this talk really, or the premise of the talk, is that these two things are key constraints as organizations try to adopt and ultimately deliver the value that's available from cloud. Also, intersperse this whole talk with a number of case studies referencing that it can be done. It's not easy, it's not common practice by any means today in the corporate landscape, but it can be done and has been done by the chosen few who've had the courage to back their convictions. And then finally, give you some some thinking points around how you can get started or move faster on this journey. So what you think you should do. So first of all, organizational effectiveness. So left-hand side, it's out of a book called Organization Physics. And it's, I guess, a pretty confronting table when you first look at it. It says that 20% of the work that's done in enterprises or corporates today actually adds value to your end customer. So 80% of the time you're doing, your organization is doing stuff today, you're doing stuff that's adding no value to your end customer. So why is that? It's number one, maybe because the processes that are in place are probably outdated. They haven't been updated in maybe 20, 30 years. Technology's moved on. Number two, how we do change projects and how we've delivered change historically. I think everyone in this room would admit doesn't work. Harvard Business Review said that 85% of new products fail. That's a lot of wasted effort. It's a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted money, whether it's your own money or whether it's money you spend with contractors. So we want to move this. The best organizations. So he picks Toyota. He picks a number of organizations that he would place into the far right-hand side, and says, 70% of all the effort that's spent in these best organizations, best large corporates, delivers value to end customers. So really what we're talking about today is moving you from the 20 to the 70. Try and get as much of the effort and what you're doing. That's changing this, functional focus to kind of customer centricity and the principles of Lean and how they can be applied, and some of the challenges that organizations face when they try to apply Lean principles at scale in their organizations. So conventional business models are under attack through disruption. Everyone talks about disruption. It's look on Twitter, everything's being disrupted from some angle or another. What does that actually mean? What are the underlying themes that we're seeing that are causing disruption in the market today? So if you deconstruct the business model, you can pretty much group it into four key headings. First of all, you've got your customers. So your customers, traditionally, when we think about a business model, we think about how can we maintain that customer for as long as possible? How can we not lock them in either commercially or technically or in some way, maintain that customer? Customers now are empowered. They've got a huge amount of choice. They've got data at their fingertips. They want to be able to make choices in real time based on data. We see this in financial services as the whole financial services market's been unbundled, and no longer are people staying with the one bank for life. Secondly, processes. Again, traditional kind of Six Sigma view would have been, how do we make this process as efficient, as cost-effective as possible? And we'll do it absolutely perfectly for a long period of time, and we'll optimize that. Whereas now we're talking about adaptive processes. So how do we adapt in real time to this changing customer behavior? At Amazon we talk about fault tolerant, infinitely scalable, elastic kind of infrastructure to allow us to be adaptive. So how do you, that again is a switch in how we think about our business. Resources. So this is everywhere. Cloud obviously is a variable consumption pay-as-you-go model, but the application, you would have heard Airbnb, in the taxi industry, obviously with Uber, Amazon Flex last week in the logistics industry. So this idea of no longer using your assets as a competitive advantage. Traditionally, large corporates, their market cap would have been heavily dictated by the tangible assets. So the ratio of tangible assets to market cap was 50, 60%. What's Facebook? 1%. The assets that they own versus their overall market cap. So that's going away. This traditional barrier to entry has disappeared. And finally, your cost base. Incremental reduction in your cost base, that's well and good. But now with the emergence of digital channels, you've got this zero marginal cost of doing business. So looking at trying to do what you've done yesterday and do it better, cheaper, 5%, 10% cheaper, is now, again, what good is that to you in a market where you can kind of go global overnight with very, very limited additional cost? And this has all come from cloud computing. So cloud computing is driving this, and that's the way, I think, a way to kind of deconstruct the disruption conversation. So what is lean? Let's just outline what it is. So focus on customer value, customer centricity. What's your value hypothesis and how you're going to add value for your customer? At Amazon, we use press releases. We talk about a press release saying that ultimate value statement is going to be at the end. And then we say, how will you deliver that product or service to your customer? What does that look like? What does that value stream look like? And then it's really the next question is, should we build it? How do we validate that value hypothesis and whether that's accurate or not? So we focus on what's called a minimum viable product, build something as quickly and as cheaply as possible and test customer feedback on that. Not can we build it, should we build it? And then create flow. So, again, simplify the process as much as possible and use things like automation. So, Toyota just-in-time manufacturing principle of Toyota that came out there. We obviously use, our automation tools. Anyone who's heard James Hamilton speak previously would hear how we use automation as a foundation of our overall business. And then finally, continuous cycle and iteration. So once you've built that loop, how do you iterate through that loop as quickly as possible? And get that data points about your customer and how they're responding to your product or your service as quickly as possible, and then pivot on that or persevere on the line you're going based on the feedback loop. And again, this all might sound pretty simple, but apply this to how you've done traditional change projects in your organization. Is this something you apply, or do you do something like a business case, functional requirements? How do we build it? Not can we build it? What are we based on internal assumptions, or maybe the board's decision or the CEO's decision? So where did it come from? Lean really originated in Toyota in the 60s. Toyota basically challenged what was commonplace kind of thinking at the time around manufacturing. It was kind of Taylor management framework, which said that, humans are just another cog in the manufacturing line. They really shouldn't be treated as intelligent beings. They just should be told to do like everybody else. Toyota challenged that and said, no, we want to enforce a level of autonomy. We want to give these people, let them make decisions based on what they see every day. And that was hugely disruptive, much higher quality, much lower cost outcome. That went from there, we went into, Six Sigma with Motorola in the 80s. And then obviously that was applied, Lean Six Sigma, to a number of different services, procurement, all of the back office processes you're probably somewhere familiar with in over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So the Lean Startup, probably many of you in here have heard of the Lean Startup, Eric Ries, 2008. Toyota said there was a gap between engineering and marketing. What the Lean Startup says is there's a gap between you and your customer. And Eric Ries took the principles, which are all around operational effectiveness. How can I do things better, faster, cheaper? And he said, I'm going to use these principles to create the next product. So he took it from a kind of bottom line driven outcome to a top line outcome. So how do I create new products and services, and how can I identify new sources of revenue for my business? So, it's the same principles, but applied in a completely different way. And that was, again, focused on a key kind of principle was that often you don't know what your customer wants. Don't assume you know anything. And often the customer doesn't know what they want either. The famous Henry Ford quote, if we did what the customer asked, we would have built faster horses. So they're the two keys. So how do you navigate in that area of high level of uncertainty? Now, really, what you're trying to do is to get to a product market fit as quickly as possible by releasing something as quickly and as cheaply as possible, testing that hypothesis, and then either pivoting or persevering based on that feedback loop with you and your customer. And you're using metrics called actionable metrics, so metrics that tell you about customer performance. And we'll dig into that. So as I said at the outset, like this talk, we're seeing cloud computing. We're seeing yesterday, Andy spoke about this. We can see cloud is everywhere. Cloud is penetrating lots of markets to a variable degree. Every enterprise and every industry vertical is adopting cloud to some degree. But is everybody realizing the potential, all of the available benefits that's available from cloud, or are they leaving a lot of benefits on the table? And I think the purpose of today is that we believe, without addressing what Joanne's going to dive into in a minute, you will fail to deliver the ultimate value that the cloud can offer you. Yes, you'll get potentially some cost savings. You might get incremental improvements on how you do things today, but will you be able to get that top line, that overall transformation that's out there as a result of cloud? No, unless you tackle these core management processes and governance practices that we're going to talk about here. So what does that mean? So again, back to the wall. So there's three, I think, three key things here. Culture. Joanne talks about this in the book. It's really about this experimentation culture and accepting failure. Management processes. We'll talk. Joanne will talk about finance and governance, risk and compliance, and corporate governance as well here. And then technology. So technology is really what you've been listening to for the last 2.5, 3 days. Really around the architecture, which is AWS. Your development and operations teams and how they can coexist. So really DevOps, and we'll talk a bit more around the benefits around that. And then information security. Information security and how that overlaps with governance, risk, and compliance is a huge area that can inhibit the ultimate value you can deliver from cloud. Okay, Joanne. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. So this is what we've got today. There's a disconnect between the capabilities that technology, cloud technology particularly, can give to us as organizations. But then we've got these 20th century management processes built atop 19th century management principles. And I was doing research on OpEx, CapEx. I was reading some statement of position papers from the Accounting Council of America. I probably got that name wrong. But anyway, I was reading it, and I was going, this is how you allocate funding into CapEx or OpEx. So your requirements gathering is all OpEx. Your dev and test are all CapEx. And it goes on like this. And you go, but that is totally built on the premise that you're still doing waterfall methodologies with standalone technologies, okay? They haven't changed it in 20 years. And this is, other accounting principles, 100 years old. We're still following them in today's organizations. So Andy Jassy yesterday spoke about the freedoms that cloud services and AWS bring to organizations. And the last one he spoke about was this freedom for software delivery teams to control their own destiny. And I'm going to tell you that this is what's going to get in your way. So you come back, we've got 19,000 plus people here at reInvent. You're all going to go back on Monday morning and say, yeah, let's do it. And you know what? That will get in your way. Okay? So pay attention to it. And I'll tell you, it's a lot harder than changing the technology. Okay. So talk briefly about DevOps, and this relates to culture. So there's this report called the State of DevOps Report. It's produced mostly by Puppet Labs with some partners. We were their partner in 2014 with ThoughtWorks. And this is the first time they did it. It was a large scientific survey. They looked for scientific correlations between IT performance and business performance. And guess what they found? There's a direct correlation. Is that a surprise to you guys? I can't see very well, right? Okay, we all know this, and some of us have problem improving IT performance because of the processes that we're forced to follow. But DevOps also was tagged in the whole continuous delivery movement, tagged to improved IT performance. But the other thing about it was they talked a lot about the culture of DevOps, and that's that collaboration and the ability to experiment and use real data to make decisions rather than, the highest individual paid person in the room, that sort of thing. And using small incremental steps to move forward rather than a big upfront planning. That's what DevOps is about. It's using automation to help you make better decisions. So Puppet Labs also repeated the survey this year, and they found some more interesting stuff. And these reports are actually available online for free from Puppet Labs. Just go down, just enter your email address, get some spam for a while, but they'll give it to you for free. So if you have a high IT performance, these teams are able to release 30 times more frequently. They have a 200 times shorter lead time from I've got an idea to I can put it into production, and they have 60 times fewer failures. Now that's high performance, and that allows the business to move at a faster pace. The other interesting thing that came out of this year's report was that they asked about, are you greenfield, are you brownfield, are you legacy? Because a lot of enterprises particularly say, well, I have all this legacy I have to deal with. I can't possibly do this. And you know what? You can. In the report, you may not be able to do it exactly like a greenfield, and you have to work really hard to work with the legacy systems, but you can apply the principles and concepts of Lean, which is essentially what DevOps is built on, and improve your IT performance. So next thing I want to talk about the culture is this gap. The gap between the business and technology. How many people in organizations here would say there's a gap that exists there? A few hands going up. Okay, good. This is what inhibits value creation. So I mentioned we have the technology. We all know what we're capable of doing if we could just get over some of the cultural things and get the business online. So when I talk about this, it is basically what we want to do is realizing that the business today is technology, and technology is a business. So what does that require of us is that we actually have to recognize that and start building relationships with the business where we can actually leverage the technology to get the maximum benefits from it. Okay, there's one company that's remained on the S&P 500 index since its inception in 1927. Anybody know which one company that is? I'm hearing, who said it first? Was it GE? It is GE. Yesterday we had Jim Fowler explain how GE continues to move with its tradition of transformation, because that's what it's allowed it to remain on the S&P 500 index for the past almost 100 years, 90 years? Can't do the math very well. But he mentioned something in that keynote that really struck me, and he said that every industrial organization today has to realize that it needs to move to be a digital one, okay? And he talked about, basically the thing that struck me, and I had heard from the GE CEO, and quote saying, we are now a technology company. We need to get over that. And he said, their revenue growth is now being driven through the use of software. And most companies and organizations within the Western world, that is true, right? I was reading a Harvard Business Review case study on DBS Bank out of Singapore, and they've been going through a digital transformation over the last 5 years or so. They actually reorganized at the start of that transformation, and what they did is they brought technology and their business operations together under one umbrella, measuring them on the same measures. That really forced a lot of their people, their executives particularly, to start thinking about technology in a different way, because all of a sudden, I got to work with these people, I got to understand what the heck they're talking about. So I liked a really good quote there was that we took senior business executives and we transformed them from technology idiots into digital warriors. One executive actually learned how to program his own app on his mobile device. And he was really proud of that. It was basically a scheduler, but he said, I figured out how it works, so now I can have conversations. And I would say to people in this room, there is a challenge for you. So if you're a technology nerd, you need to transform into a digital business ninja. Okay? You need to start understanding your business, what's driving it, and what the true value to the customers is. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, it's by building a culture of experimentation. So talked about technology. We need to view it as a strategic capability in all businesses. And what that means is that you may need to put a considerable amount of investment into swapping out legacy systems, simplifying systems, so that you're actually able to move and grow at a faster pace. That's the foundation of all this that we're talking about. And it's probably as much about technology as I'm going to get to today. But it's very critical, very important. The other part of this is building that willingness to support experimentation in a culture and get those faster feedback loops going and making decisions based on real-time data rather than, I think that this is a great idea, or we did this over here in our organization, so we should, in the other organization work for, so we should do it here. So you have to, first of all, reduce the learning anxiety within your organization. So many of our organizations are paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision. And we say, we're going to be safe and just keep doing what we know has worked in the past, although it really hasn't worked very well for us because there's a lot of failures. But it's accepted. And if we keep quiet and just keep doing it, we won't get penalized in any way, shape, or form. So when you have a culture of experimentation, people are allowed to try new things, but the key is there. If you don't get the outcome that you may have expected or you hypothesized that you would get, you're not penalized for it. It's more like, what did you learn from this? And you reduce the risks of that experimentation by working in smaller chunks. That's how you do it. And by doing that, you create an ability to innovate at scale. Now, this is a huge cultural shift for a lot of organizations, but it's really key, because if you don't do this, you will never achieve the benefits that you could with all the technology capabilities we have today. So I'm going to talk about finance. Mostly, this is such near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time doing budgets in my life. Sigh. I've also played the game quite well myself. I don't know if we really call it lean finance, but I got to say that the traditional budget process, that big annual upfront, drop everything for the next 2 months and submit all your forms on the dates that we tell you to. How many have been through this hell? How many like that? Nobody's putting their hands up, right? Okay, you know the pain. But this is what happens, basically. We all line up and we say, gosh, we all need money. And the executives are left there and say, I have no idea why all these people need all this money. So I'm going to tell you that you need to reduce your costs by 10% this year. You need to drive your revenues up by 25%. And you're going to do that by growing. Okay? Has anybody had that conversation with their executives? And you go, I don't know how I'm going to do that. But anyway, we figure it out somehow. How do we get over this? Well, first of all, we need to stop thinking about this project paradigm, particularly with regards to technology, where you have the business, the projects, and operations. If we think of operations as IT, for simplicity's sake, all reporting up and down chains of command, and all trying to meet these expectations that are set by somebody else. And we know they're not realistic, but we spend a huge, inordinate amount of time justifying why we're spending what we're spending today, why we didn't meet the targets, and it is what it is. But there's no incentive or drive there for us to do better. Now, what happens is that the communication channels, because they're going up and down all the time, really don't allow us to get a cross-functional view, and they don't give us visibility into actual value of products and services. Why do we continue to do this? The big reason is that our financial systems are built to report that way. So we organize everything around that, right? And have you ever tried swapping out a financial system? Do you know how hard that is? I was on a project one time, it took 3 years, and we still didn't get it right. So everybody's afraid to change that. But what if you stop thinking projects in that, up and down, siloed organization structure, and start to think end-to-end products? From I have an idea about what we should deliver to our customers, what's value, and what's the total cost of ownership on that idea to get it to the customer. So you start with multiple disciplinary cross-functional teams. This means that there's people in the business, there's people from technology, there's people from GRC teams, security, governance, risk, and compliance. There's people from legal in there, maybe even HR, finance should throw in. But they all have responsibilities with regards to the outcome of the work of the group and the team that they're on. They all use shared services, and this is where cloud and methodologies like continuous deployment come into play. You still have teams that have to help manage these services, and their costs can be allocated proportionately to the product teams. And then finally, it's delivered to the customers. Now, an important part about lean startup, as Conor mentioned, is that your customers should be considered part of your team as well, measuring how they feel. So if you can get this end-to-end product view, what happens is you get better visibility into the total value of your products and services you're bringing to your customers. And you can start making better decisions about where the money should go, because you can measure the outcome, right, of all the work from end to end. Now, I mentioned that our systems aren't designed this way, but then I listened yesterday to the capabilities that are being developed on web services, right? We could migrate an ERP and put it into sort of this non-proprietary database. All we need is a couple of smart people then to start manipulating that data to give us this end-to-end view of what our total costs for our products and services are. And just think about that. It might take a while, but if you could get that view, how would that affect the decision-making that's made within your organization? I've done this with spreadsheets. It was a little painful. It wasn't terribly precise. It was fairly accurate. But what it did is it gave the executive in our organization a much better view into where the technology costs were actually being driven from the business, rather than hardware, servers, laptops, software. What the heck is this all about? It gives them a much better perspective on the value of the products and services. So I usually talk about finance for an hour. I spent the last 10 minutes talking about it. If you wanted more information, I highly recommend you go to BRT Bogner's book, Beyond Budgeting. He talks about different concepts that you can apply within organizations to get a better governance over finance and make better decisions about how to spend money. And there's also the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable organization. Lots of references there that you can look at and to get more ideas about what are some of the things you could do with your finance team on the ground on Monday morning. So next we'll talk about procurement, and I'll give it back to Conor at this point.
Yeah, keep it quick. Okay, thanks, Joanne. Yeah, so procurement, again, the cloud has had a massive impact in terms of IT procurement. I'm sure you all would agree. This movement towards as-a-service pricing has given you as a customer, I presume most of your customers in the room, a huge amount more leverage in terms of how you buy IT versus what it was like 10, even 5 years ago. You can now buy in small increments. You can minimize waste. All of the lean principles I discussed earlier really are available now in how you buy, not just Amazon Web Services, but every level of your IT stack on a pay-per-use consumption basis. But so how does that work versus traditional models? So you've got a demand profile that you're not really sure what it looks like. You enter into a long-term contract. You have to make some assumptions around what your demand profile is going to be. You have an issue obviously there based on the waste because you've got to overspec what you need. And whether this is a licensing agreement for a software vendor or whether this is infrastructure, and we've, Gartner say that best case infrastructure is 30% provisioned in a traditional data center. Any existing IT long-term contract faced these constraints. And then, you've got a lost opportunity cost. Your business grows and you can't respond to it. That's arguably much more costly than anything that is to do with the cost of IT. So what do you do in an IT world or in a cloud world? You can obviously scale your demand in real time, or your supply in real time in line with your demand. That gives you huge advantages versus what was there traditionally. I guess what we're seeing is that while these levers are available, organizations are yet, and the industry is yet to fully mature to be able to fully grasp those levers. A colleague of mine, Evan Crawford, did a great presentation earlier today on cost optimization at scale, but it's not just an AWS, Amazon Web Services issue. It's not just an infrastructure as a service issue. This is IT. IT is a service. You can buy every level of your IT cost base in an as a service model, but to do it and fully leverage the benefits that are available, you need to change your team and change how your team operates. Long-term, entering into an extended RFP process, I'm sure you've all done it at some stage, or at least responded to one, or a tender, and gotten really trying to make assumptions of what you actually need, being very prescriptive around the specifications and what you're going to deliver to. So very output focused, but not really thinking about the outcomes the customer wants to achieve and how you can create value for that customer. The levers, obviously elasticity, you can turn things off when you're not using them. AWS, but also you can do that. Workspaces, you can turn off our workspaces offering again for universities when out of class time, and again that applies everywhere. You can right size, so you can right size instances obviously, but also you could potentially right size the licenses you enter. You could have a gold-plated license that you've seen this for many years, where you sign up with 5 years and nobody actually uses. People use 10% of that functionality over the term of the contract. Now you can see that and you can right size it. And if you don't have those agreements with your vendors, you should be challenging your vendors to have those agreements. And you can reserve. So for the piece where you can project the demand, you can reserve capacity and get benefits against that, but do that on your terms, not on the vendor's terms. These are all readily available, but I think the market in general needs to mature in how they go after it and fully leverage the benefits that are available. So a couple of quick examples. UltraServe, which are an ANZ-based partner, one of the great things that we're seeing here is that IT is moving away from being a fixed cost base, fixed black box. Traditionally, to what Jan was saying, you have a number of IT cost line items, but it's really a black box to understand how that's adding value to your business and how you can manage that. So what these guys have done is, it's an e-commerce application, and rather than charge on a proprietary license basis or even a per user basis, they've charged on a per basket basis. So every time the end customer wins, they get paid. The customer doesn't articulate how the service should be delivered, how the application should be architected, nothing like that. So that the benefit there is for UltraServe, they're obviously going to get alignment in terms of the commercials, but also they're going to get flexibility in how they deliver their solution. So they're going to, announcements yesterday that came online, if they were to benefit the application, they could roll them in real time. So a huge amount of flexibility and then complete alignment from a commercial perspective between the vendor and the customer. And the more you can move IT away from that kind of fixed black box cost base to a cost of goods sold where it's variable and you can flex that in real time. Then, Gov.uk will speak about this in a bit more detail later on, but this is a good one again where there was a directive issued across the UK government, I think about 2 years ago, and basically said, no contracts over 2 years, maximum contract value 100 million, which sounds like a lot, but for them was a big statement. No auto renewals. If you're doing consulting in a part of the government, you can't do managed services in that same division. A number of directives, and off the back of that, they saved $1.6 billion, so that pounds. So that's what's available. And again, that was a directive from the top, and I'm seeing in the conversations we have with CIOs, there's a lot of push around how do I get my IT cost base away from this fixed black box to this pay-as-you-go consumption-based model. So again, additional reading on consumption economics, The New Rules of Tech is a good book to read in this space, written through the lens of an IT vendor and how they need to transform their business to be successful in the cloud, but also very, very relevant if you're a customer, because you can see exactly how it's changing. And these guys have nailed it in terms of what's happening and the implication of that to the market as a whole. Cheers.
Okay. So what Conor didn't say when he introduced me is I come out of a background of governance, risk, and compliance. I've led security departments. I've been an auditor. I've been I've worked on the IT side, helping people prepare for audits and making sure controls are in place. So this is kind of like budgeting, very dear to my heart. GRC. When I talk about GRC, I'm talking about the processes and structures and teams we put in place to help organizations meet compliance. There's lots of laws, privacy laws, lots of regulatory laws when you're in specific industrials. For example, I've worked for an airline, lots of regulation there. Healthcare, lots of regulation there. So your security teams, the PMO, your organizational risk teams, your technology risk teams, your auditors. These are the teams I'm talking about when I say GRC. So they're all put together to manage risk. So in an organization, what's the biggest risk we have when it comes to technology? Anybody know? People. Security. Good answers. Inertia. Yeah. Okay, you guys have been thinking about this. You build the wrong thing. How many times does this happen? How many controls do we have in place? About this time last year, I was in the States, and it was healthcare.gov. And I loved the quote. I spent $174 million, and all I got was bad press. Right? There's an organization, had all the GRC in place, all the processes defined, knew exactly what they were doing, and what happened? Big fail. And if you go, look this up on any search engine and you just type in software failure, software project failures, tons of them. I don't have to go through and give you examples. And you can probably think of places you've worked where this is actually what's happened. Waste, lots of it. So why does this happen? When we have what I call process madness. You have this lean, you have the enterprise loop, I should say, which is the plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. How many feel like they're in that loop? I plan something, I do it. I plan something, I do it, right? This is because we spent a lot of, as an organization, we've put a lot of effort into defining processes. We've built big tools to help us manage the processes, and we've sunk a lot of costs into it, so we're afraid to change it. What we need to do is go back to the Deming cycle, and we need to get rid of this plan do loop and start adding the check and act, right? This is the basics of lean. Plan, do, check, act. The faster you can do it, the faster you learn, the faster you'll get better. Now with GRC processes, we don't do this. I know, I was an auditor. I got a book that said, this is how you do an audit, here's the controls you look for, and this is the evidence you should seek. And that's what I followed. Here's the dirty little secret. Most auditors never worked on a delivery program. Many haven't worked in IT, ever. Okay, I was an exception, I found, in that I actually knew what agile development was when I was doing my certifications to be an auditor. I had to explain it to the instructor because they had it all wrong. Okay, so there's a problem. And what the result is that we get lots of large teams forming, on the GRC side particularly. Delivery teams, product teams have lots of waiting because they've got to fill out the documentation and the forms. And we get a lot of box ticking. Have they met the control? Yes. Yep, you guys are okay to go. But what really happens, we know because even from, like if you think about healthcare.gov, is you can tick all the boxes. But you're spending an inordinate amount of money to do this, and yet you still have ineffective risk management. You're still building the wrong thing. We need to help GRC teams move out of this painful cycle they're in, because we're experiencing the pain. Most of the processes that are built today are the antithesis of lean, mostly because they don't do the check act, right? And they rely on documentation rather than actual outcomes to prove compliance and reduce risk. If we fill out the documents, we're fine. They never measure the outcome, like what was the result of the program at the end. So there is an alternative approach, and it requires a lot of cooperation between teams. So basically the way it looks like today is that you have your product team over here, your GR team over here. They never really talk to each other. So the GRC teams will say, here's a policy, follow it. And it's usually filled with lots of rules that you have to do this when, and you have to use this set of tools to do it. And then before we allow you to do something like move to cloud, you're going to have to fill out all these forms, and we're going to have to tick all the boxes. And we do it, but we wait, and it takes a long time. What if product teams did that share responsibility? I don't know how many people here were in the security track today, but there was a lot of talk about shared responsibilities. And there's this talk about rugged, which is DevSecOps, or whatever you want to call it. But essentially it is the delivery teams taking ownership around security of what they build, and reducing the risk to the end consumer by practicing good security hygiene. So if you could manage your own risk position and use ongoing monitoring and reporting to ensure, utilize that to help provide evidence that you're actually managing risks. And the GRC teams change their tune from this policing type of organization so that and actually start to fine-tune and evolve their processes over time so that they get better effectiveness. And systems are designed and operated in a much lower risk manner. What would it take? First of all, you have to start talking to one another. They're not going to go away. You can't hide under your desk and pretend that, if they don't see me, they'll forget about me. Being an auditor, I know that feeling that people were doing that. So common goals, the teams need to be measured on the same thing. So don't measure the GRC team on whether the compliance box are ticked. And don't measure the product team on how fast they can deliver features, because there's sort of like this butting up that's going to happen. And you'll get that conflict, and people will find ways to get around all the processes. And you have to have the ongoing collaboration. The other thing is you may have to redefine your policies. Most policies are written as rules. You will do it this way, the way I tell you, and you will use these tools. And this is when you will do this. Rather, policies should be written as guidelines, okay? Define the boundaries for decision making. Who can make what decision when? And what would constitute a step over the boundaries? So we always knew when we were working in airlines that all our decisions, the one boundary that defined every decision we made, no matter where we were in the organization, is this something that's safe to do, right? Does it put our people or our customers in physical harm? We could not cross that line if it did. And then we would use, over here, your documentation is your configuration management on AWS, and you'd use ongoing monitoring and reporting. The security teams could check themselves to make sure that you're not crossing the boundaries. That's what the approach looks like. So, fraction of the cost. Etsy is an organization. They do, it's a web application where, basically the PCI DSS compliance. They sell vintage items and handcrafted items, okay? And the way they tackled PCI DSS, because it's very, very prescriptive, is they said, we've got to contain the blast area. So they actually, and when I went to the security talks this morning, and yesterday they talked about this too, is segregating the information that needs the most protection. So they did a lot of technology work to do that. But they also did a lot of work, and PCI DSS is very prescriptive about certainly segregation of duties and who has access to the payment card information. And so they said we're going to contain the blast area by sectioning that off. And then what we're going to look at is compensating controls, and really good compensating controls to restricting access, particularly when using continuous delivery, is that you use the ongoing monitoring. Okay, who's doing what when? So real-time monitoring and reports to generate. And they actually worked with their auditors to say, look, we're not going to do segregation of duties in our product teams. You know, if they build it, they run it. You can't have production separate from dev and test. The same people are doing it. So they worked with the auditor to figure out what the compensating controls are. And that is a really good way, you know, an example of how collaboration will help you meet compliance, reduce the risk because now you're doing automation, and you'll actually get better results. So I just want to talk briefly about corporate governance. And corporate governance is the ability to know, where are you going as an organization? Are we on the right track? Should we change our approach? That's what it's about. It's not about putting in a lot of rules and structure. So most people have seen this 3 horizon model from McKinsey. And they talk about, you know, horizon 1 being the stuff that you have in play today, okay? And what are you going to do that's going to, you know, disrupt for the near future? And then in the far future, there'll be more disruption points. Because we know there will be disruption. If we're not prepared to disrupt our own organization, somebody else will. Now, the thing about corporate governance is that you can't use the same funding models, you can't use the same metrics to measure the success of what's in play in the different horizons today. So it makes perfect sense to use ROI for what's on horizon 1 today. It may be 60 to 70% of your revenue is being generated by that. And you have a very clear idea of what's going on and the functionality. But as you're building functionality up on new products and services, or you're innovating and have something that's completely different, how do you decide whether you should continue to invest in it or not? You need a different set of metrics. You need a different funding model for it too, because the ROI, you know, it's not long-term. These are short-term investments. You may decide to drop it. And Horizon 3, which may be 10% of your revenues, is even, you know, different yet again. Like again, how do I determine ROI on something that nobody else has done ever? Right? So I want to tell a story about Intuit. And basically, they use different metrics for theirs. So the ROI is on their Horizon 1, you know, which is the TurboTax, QuickBooks, Quicken, Mint. But for Horizon 2, they use what they call love metrics. How much do our customers love this product? Okay? And Horizon 3 is very much short funding, show us the data, and we'll decide whether we want to persevere, pivot, or just drop completely. So remember that wall at the beginning. You need to ask yourself these things. With corporate governance, you know, when you go back to work on Monday, what are your Horizon 2s and 3s, and how are you measuring them? Do you even know? You have to seek that out. In finance, how could you improve the visibility into the total cost of products in your organization, not just IT cost as a general lump? GRC, is there something you can do to change the relationship between your teams and GRCs to start that collaboration and change the controls? Procurement, how would you change your organization's practice to allow better use of technology today? And the last one, organizational alignment. What are the common measures that your organization uses to determine the contribution that your team has to value? If there aren't any, what would you use? So it's tough to do this, but it's completely doable. I'll just tell you briefly about Suncorp. They've moved 90% of their core services, and I'm talking about stuff that's on mainframes, into the cloud, right? They've reduced 15 complex legacy systems down to 2. So that means they've decommissioned 12 of them. They've got a single code base for all their customer-facing websites. In the course of doing this over the last 3 years, one of their main tenets of operation on its program management was, if we can change the business process so that we don't have to write code, that's what we will do. And this is really key to being successful at organization transformation. Because if you're just re-engineering bad processes, it's not going to work for you. You just spent a whole lot of money on technology that's not going to get you much benefit. So the outcome you can see there, they actually achieved the savings of 225 million Australian, and this is their projections for 2016. The other good case is gov.uk. They were in a mess, colossal failures. It's a pretty common story. But they started a digital transformation in 2012, and they started with 14 people, 12 weeks, £261,000. Today, they have 25 government departments. They've all switched to new web services using principles and guidelines instead of rules. They implemented many changes to achieve this, and there's no time that I could go through them all, but I really encourage you to go to gov.uk digital services site. One of their tenets of operation is complete transparency into how we are operating. Everything's there. It's a gold mine of information on how you would set up organizational architecture, for example, technical architecture. How could you change your PMO? It's really quite fascinating read, and it's free to everybody to have a look at. So the outcomes of that are pretty impressive, right? $105 million savings with technology simplification. And through the whole digital and technology transformation over the past couple of years, they've saved 1.7 billion pounds, okay? Huge. Plus, the citizens love the new sites. It's much easier for them to get government services. How do they do it? We've talked about these things. Multidisciplinary team. They've limited their initial scope. They deliver value early and often. They strangle the old world. Don't try to eat the elephant all in one meal, okay? Pursue principles over rules. Culture of the continuous innovation, improvement, and experimentation.
Thank you. Okay, guys, I know we're up on time. Appreciate your patience. We'll wrap it up pretty quickly. So yeah, obviously, like it's reInvent after all. So just to reinforce that AWS, I guess, can enable you to become a lean enterprise. So customer value, obviously, you're probably all aware of this, but you're spending, on average, large enterprises, 70% of your overall IT budget keeping the lights on. You know, just standing still. So obviously, one of the value props here is allowing to turning that on its head and reducing that cost of maintenance. You know, mapping the value stream is obviously a lot easier, and getting to market is good. You know, the batch size reduces, given the pay-as-you-go consumption model, and obviously the innovation bottleneck disappears. You can provision in minutes, and the cost of experimentation is an awful lot lower. And then you can create flow. You know, you've got a huge amount of flexibility in terms of how you deploy the platform, either at an EC2 instance level or using tools like Elastic Beanstalk or any third-party tools on our marketplace. And then, you know, you can do things like A/B and split testing to get that short feedback loop between you and your customer. And you also have, even subsequent to yesterday's announcements, huge granular data around every step in the process. So CloudTrail logs, even a DBR around cost optimization, lots of different information there to make really informed, you know, tactical decisions based on real data, not based on assumptions. So what should I do next? So, you know, we're big believers at Amazon around kind of multidisciplined, autonomous, you know, kind of co-located teams, the whole two-piece of team concept. And we've seen that kind of, I guess, that model kind of take root, or at least get some momentum in the enterprise cloud adoption space, probably tagged as a cloud competency center or a cloud center of excellence. So that's one option. It's not, there's a broader piece here. Obviously, our professional services team can talk in detail around what that looks like. But I think, having that, how do you roll everything we've talked about today, and how do you gather the people across the organization together and get them all united behind a common front? And this is an area where we've seen it grow from very small beginnings to enterprise-wide adoption pretty quickly, and that reinforces a number of the lean principles we've talked about today. And then final closing slide. So I think it's very important to think big. It's a lot of organizations now are like, we're cloud first, or we're cloud only, or that's our strategy. But let's remember, cloud is a means to an end here. Cloud's about, we're doing cloud to ultimately deliver value for our customers. So always be clear on why you're doing it. The Suncorp example, a common platform for all brands. A preferred default place for all citizens to go for gov.uk. Start small. So again, pick something, don't bet the farm on it, test it, deliver value early and often, generate momentum from that. And finally, learn fast. Create that feedback loop between you and your customers, and then get that cycle of momentum. That gov.uk is a great example for that. Overall reading, obviously Joanne and her colleague's book is a good read. I found it as a good reference point, certainly in this whole subject. There's also a good lean.org, Lean Enterprise Institute there with a lot of case studies that's worth reading as well. Thanks, Joanne, again for taking the time, and ThoughtWorks for coming in and sharing her insights with us. And thanks to all of you for your patience and coming along at 5:30 on a Friday after 2 long days. So thanks very much. And any questions, feel free to come up afterwards. Thank you.